Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk. Today, the topic is origin stories. And as ever, when I do the podcast, I'm always kind of riffing off of my personal essay of the week, and that was the title. And I've been thinking a lot about narrative and origin stories. And origin stories are, of course, like sort of the backstory of any character that we've come to know. In like superhero sequels, there's always, the backstory. Now you'll get like the prequel. And it's a good way of contextualizing these cultural norms that are sort of like swimming in the waters that we're immersed in, and the way that they affect us. And of course, this has been on my mind lately because of the results of the election in the United States. And in particular, I just want to be really clear about where I'm coming from with that, and I think where a lot of people are coming from, is messaging, right? So the messaging of the campaign that won was very, in my lifetime, certainly, I've never seen a campaign that was so sort of loudly, unabashedly misogynistic and bigoted and racist, just like openly, every day, all the time. As I was growing up, people would hide those things, right? If they felt them, they would, if they were at a bar and they were going to tell like a sexist joke or a racist joke, they'd look around first to make sure, like, is anyone going to hear me? And then they'd lower their voices. And for the last 10 years, people don't do that anymore. They're just kind of like loudly, just letting out the worst in themselves, which is really sad. And that's such a low bar to be missing a time when people at least understood those were not qualities or ideas or beliefs that were acceptable to be spewing in a public sphere, in a public space. And so much of what we do now is in a public sphere, meaning like the internet. And I do think that is a big part of what has happened here. And I'm certainly not alone in that. That's no hot take. That's a lot of people. I do think there's a real thing of the freedom people feel when it's anonymous, when you're not looking someone in the eye. You're not sitting across the table. You're not seeing the person's face or hearing the tone in their voice or seeing maybe the pain in their eyes or considering what has happened in this person's life to bring them to this place where they're in this kind of fear, or they've been immersed in this kind of hatred toward people who feel differently or look differently or pray or think or love differently than they do. And so those are all the things that are on my mind. Like, what has happened when we are in a country where a campaign launches an attack on women, and I understand we may feel differently about a lot of things, but that part, that's pretty undeniable. These were people and racist, eating cats and dogs, like just all these things, and women, childless cat ladies ruining the country, and just this kind of, people I think there's this idea of like, oh, that's just talk. But talk like that, messaging like that, has real life consequences for real life people. And it's already starting. Hate crimes are already going up, and it's not a coincidence. What was just basically what just happened is all the people who have these feelings of misogyny or racism or bigotry, who don't or not okay with people who think, love, pray differently than they do, they've just been emboldened. Within 24 hours of the results of this election, there was a whole thing happening, not just over social media, but like on college campuses where you got, men showing up with signs that say, "Your body, my choice." When you elect someone to the highest office in the land who's an adjudicated rapist, you are sending a very loud message that you don't care about that that's okay with you, that a person who says they like to grab women, I'm not even going to finish the sentence because I don't have to, because we all know it. We all know what he said out of his own mouth. When you tell people, I know what he said, I know who he is, I know he's been convicted in a court of law for, raping someone, and I'm going to vote for him anyway, you are saying that's okay with you, that you're willing to, at the very least, you're willing to overlook that and put that person. So the message is that men who commit crimes like that, men who dominate women, who assault women, they can still go on, not just to like not face any consequences, but they can succeed at the highest levels. You are sending a message as a society that, about half of the voting public feels like that's okay. And so there is no way to separate, whatever else. And I'm just so willing to like have that conversation about, just how many people we have living in the margins of society who are not making it, who are just falling through the cracks, who are working like 2 and 3 jobs, and they still can't afford to feed their families, or they can't figure out how to survive themselves. Or, just so many areas where, if you are to judge a society by the way it's treating its most vulnerable members, we were already failing. So, I'm fully, happy to have that conversation, that I don't think either party is adequately addressing that. But certainly the one that was just elected is not going to be the one to even begin to fix that. That's just not, that's not what's going to happen here. You can see it already. So that's why I am, one of the reasons I'm the most heartbroken, despairing, worried, concerned, is because and enraged, is because I think the reality that so many people were willing to overlook that, when it, to me, is just a full stop. We're not going to put people in office who assault women. We're not doing that. And now we have this person who's going to be the next president again, and he's nominating men who, have been credibly accused or convicted of sexual assault, and women, and women who have, sexual assault allegations. This is like, it's so rampant that it's almost just like part of the resume, for people that are coming into this next administration. And I think that's the part, is that everyone is hearing that message. So not just the people who voted for it, but everybody, whether you voted for it or you didn't, the message to everyone is, we're okay. That's not a bar that matters to us. So what happens to women and girls is not. But at the same time, this party who was just elected is saying they want to protect women and girls. And the way they want to do that is by putting people with, sexual assault convictions and allegations into the highest offices in the land. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And so for people looking at that, it's, it's the most mind-bending kind of like form of gaslighting, hypocrisy. It's really hard to listen and to watch. And then there's so many other areas too, as I was starting to say. There are the people that are like living in the margins, not making it. There's the climate crisis. There's just so many issues here that I think for me, of course I want the world to be a more peaceful place. I look back in history, and we have just, like, from the beginning of time, struggled with how to live together peacefully. And, really from the beginning of humanity, we've had this theme of violently taking what we want because we want it. And as we evolved, right, there's more of a conversation about fairness and what's reasonable and how people can coexist on a piece of land. For as long as people have been trying to claim a piece of land and live on it together in some organized fashion, there have been these conversations going on. And I talked about some of them in the essay, but you have Socrates and Aristotle and Plato having these conversations about what is the best form of government. And this is way before Christianity, right? And there's the Republic. That's a book about, like, Socrates, Aristotle was Socrates' student and Plato was Aristotle's student. And so there was a conversation going on. Socrates did not write a book. Aristotle wrote down Socrates' thoughts and beliefs and teachings. And he had some differences in opinion about what's the best form of government, and so did Plato. So there's just like conversation going on about what's best for people. And Socrates believed that in a democracy, the issue was that there were not enough educated amongst the electorate. And so it was ripe for a demagogue, like, the cult of personality, like someone to arise, and then you would have tyranny, which all of them could agree was the worst form of government. And so that was Socrates' concern about democracy. He was afraid that, a person could arise and just become an authoritarian, and that would be not a good situation. And he felt the best form of government was sort of like a philosopher king type of situation, somebody who would rule over the aristocracy, but it would be a person who had deep ethics, morals, virtue, and was really wise and would be governing for all. That was what he thought was the best. And Aristotle and Plato, like they were talking about different ideas, where it was more like, no, like the philosopher king aristocracy thing isn't great. We need more of like a situation where there's a middle class, and it's more like democracy and like and oligarchy, like people who had more, but the assumption was if the head of state was extremely wealthy from the upper class, so to speak, and they were put into power, but there was like a big voting and a very engaged electorate, then the middle class would have a lot of power in that situation and would basically be like the checks and balances. The person in power wouldn't get out of hand because there would be a lot of people appointed in the middle class to these high states of power inside the government. And it was definitely like a classist situation where you were born into it. It was decided before you arrived what role you would play. But it was this idea that everyone would, it was known as the noble lie, this idea that people were going to be told, well, this is what God chose for you. This is your station in life. It was chosen before you got here. And so this is this is the role that you have been given to play. And the idea was that, this wasn't true, but as long as you could convince people it was true, then they would not try to rise above that level, and they would also really take their responsibility seriously. So these conversations have been going on forever. But what you don't hear about, hardly at all, is Aspasia, who was the woman who taught Socrates. And he talked about her and gave her credit and said that she had taught him about the economic partnership between spouses and what was ideal there, and human relationships, and how, a partnership could thrive with respect and communication. He credited her with teaching him how to speak about things like this persuasively. She's wiped from the history. Some people say she didn't really exist, like he just made her up, which does not make any sense at all. And women have been wiped from historical records, because history's been written by men, and especially with the rise of Christianity. And so last week I was talking about different fairy tales and folk tales that we have all most of us here in the States certainly have grown up hearing. And I was talking about the Greek mythology and Athena and Medusa, and maybe that's not as widespread, but as like Sleeping Beauty, which I think most kids hear about growing up, or Maleficent, but those were the stories I was talking about in my essay last week. And in my essay this week, I was talking about Adam and Eve. And, I put a little note at the top of the essay, and I'm going to say it here too. Like, my intention is certainly not to offend anyone who's Christian or who takes comfort in the Bible. My feeling about religion generally is, if you are practicing a religion and it is making you a better human being, it is helping you to put the experience of being a human being in an often violent and confusing world in perspective or in context, if it's helping you make sense of things and have more empathy, have more tolerance, have more patience, have something steady, I have all the respect in the world for that. I'm someone who, certainly for me, I've been practicing yoga for over 30 years, and the yogic philosophy is what I look at, when I'm trying to figure out how I want to show up in the world and how I want to be walking through the world. I'm always thinking about the philosophical foundation. It's not a religion, it's a philosophical, these ideas. And the yama and niyama, something I wrote about in Yoga's Healing Power, they're, those are practical. They're really similar. Most spiritual practices, if you boil them down, they're going to have sort of like these same ideas. Don't kill anyone, don't be greedy, don't covet, don't hoard, right? Don't take more than you need, share what you can, just try to be a good neighbor, just basic stuff, right? Like, be truthful, and not only be truthful in your words and your actions, but also be truthful with yourself, self-study, know yourself, right? Usually at the core of most spiritual practices, that's what you're going to find, because if you know yourself, then you can be accountable for the way you're behaving, the things you're saying and doing, just the way that you're showing up. And I certainly take a lot of comfort in that. And also, those are good checks, right? Those are personal checks and balances. Like, am I behaving in a way that feels ethical? Are my beliefs, am I aligned in the things that I'm saying and doing with what I'm saying my core beliefs are? And if not, are those really my core beliefs? And if they are, then what's going wrong, in the space between what I believe and how I'm being, right? And so that has intellectually, emotionally, in every way, that's what I go to, when I'm trying to figure things out. And there's so much more in it, like non-attachment, right? And that's part of the meditation practice too. That's my toolbox when I'm trying to figure out, how to, if I'm struggling with something internally or I'm struggling with things that are happening around me, that's where I go to my yoga mat so I can like quiet my mind, because sometimes that's really what I need, is to just like quiet the voices and breathe and start paying attention to like sensation that's happening in the present moment, calm my nervous system, open my heart, release tension, and then figure out like how I'm feeling. And then if it's more of an intellectual or, just something I'm trying to figure out, like maybe I didn't show up the way that I wanted to, or maybe someone else is doing something that feels confusing, that philosophical practice is what I turn to. And as far as like beyond that, and I think it's fair for you to know what I think, we don't have to agree on any of this, just where I'm coming from if we're going to have this conversation. There are a lot of, if I had to say what my religion is, I think my religion is Mother Nature, like there are times where I see a flower or a plant, or I read about, a creature that lives underneath the sea, and I am astounded. And there is something in it where you're like, wow, there's divinity in this, however you want to look at it. Like, it's miraculous, whether you're talking about a scientific miracle or a spirit. Doesn't, that is not, I don't care what kind of miracle you want to call it, just to be able to be amazed, right? To not lose sight of the fact that you woke up today, if you did, on a spinning planet in one solar system, in a vast universe that's like always expanding until maybe the time when it starts to collapse in on itself, right? Like, we can't even really contain what is happening, but not to lose sight of it, right? That the sun is up there in the sky, or the moon is up there at night, or there's only one of you in all of time, there's only one of you. And like your particular, the cells that have come together to be you through genetics and timing and all kinds of, your ancestors, and just like all the ways, all the things that had to happen in order for you to be listening to this, to not lose awe around those things. So that's my religion. I'm like, what? This is unbelievable. Even if this world breaks your heart, which it will, and it does, it's so incredible just to be here, having this experience of being a human being for what is really a blink of time. And I think for me, as I've gotten older, I look at what is happening in this world, and it does break my heart, because we're guests, like we're born and we have like 75 to 100 years ish, if we're very lucky, and maybe a lot less. We don't get to know, but not a lot more than that, even in the best of scenarios. And then we're gone. The earth is going to keep spinning just like it was spinning before we got here. It's going to continue on after we go, unless we, destroy it, which we're not doing too well. But, it's like we're here for a blink of time and we don't own it. It's like you can buy a house. Of course you can. You can buy a house. You can use this stuff, money that we've invented, and you can work hard to earn enough of it to go to a bank and, take out a mortgage and own a house. But in all reality, the land that your house is built on, even if you've got, a deed with your name on it and you've got like a survey that says this is the amount, it's not yours. You're still borrowing it. You're not taking that with you when you go. And I think for me, one of the saddest things is just watching the amount of time and energy we spend killing each other on this planet, and taking, hoarding, depleting resources, just being awful to one another, killing people, building weapons and bombs. And like, it's just like, what are we doing? Full stop. What are we doing? It literally makes no sense if you could kind of get, 30,000 feet up and think about it. It's so sad that human beings are this violent and selfish. It's so sad, because if we shared and if we could get down with like, okay, wait a minute, we're one species on one planet, all we need to do is coexist and share the resource. Like, there would be enough for everyone. And I don't know, I just wouldn't get into everything we've done, the borders that we've created, the countries that we've named, the gods that we say we're praying. It's all stuff that we have created, and it has caused a lot of division and a lot of rage and a lot of us versus them kind of, just kind of way of approaching our time here on Earth. And yeah, I think it's incredible. I think we have completely lost the thread. And, it probably started around the time of agriculture, when we started living in boxes and selling, it's just, this hasn't gone well. And in America, I mean, we have, listen, all these things that you taught, capitalism. And I mean, if you are teaching survival of the fittest and the American dream, and the idea is look out for number one, and, make as much as you can and get as much as you can, and that's how you're going to be happy. And you're not at the same time teaching empathy and, I don't know, just worrying about your neighbor, trying to make sure everybody around you is safe, then this is what you're going to get. You're going to get a culture that is, and, by the way, even Darwin with survival of the fittest, even though that's kind of the tagline that he gets, if you actually read his stuff, what he said is the most adaptable will survive. The most adaptable, the people who are able to roll with the changing times. And so there's a lot of, even that's another sort of like origin story about America, land of the free, home of the brave. I mean, when you say land of the free, what free are you talking about? Who falls under that umbrella? I mean, is everyone here free? Because I think we can probably, if we're going to be honest, agree that's not the case, and never has been. And there have been a lot of, I was talking about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, because the president-elect has merch. He got a lot of merch. He's selling electric guitars and, gold watches for $100,000 and Bibles for $60 that have the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution included inside the Bible. And the idea, I mean, I can see it coming, and I think most of you can too, right? There's this whole conversation about having the 10 Commandments in public schools. Not everyone in America is Christian. Please grasp that. Not everyone in America is Christian. That was the point, right? We were supposed to be a melting pot. We have the Statue of Liberty gifted to us by France, bring us your tired, your poor. I mean, you have to at some point decide what story about America you like. and who you want to be. Because even at our best, we've never been who we have said we are. And the only way to be better and do better is to be able to look honestly at ourselves. That's the only way. And I mean that like on a personal level and then on the macrocosm, right? There's the microcosm and there's always a reflection there. Whatever's happening around us is like a reflection of what's happening inside a lot of us. And if what's happening inside too many of us is a lack of acceptance, a rejection, being at war within yourself, well, that's what you're going to see reflected around you. And if too many of your neighbors are at war within themselves. And I mean, a lot of us, like sometimes, listen, you might have a feeling and you feel shame about the feeling. You start pushing it down. That's what I'm talking about, right? You're kind of at war within yourself here. It's not that you have to act on every feeling that you have, but if you won't even let it rise to the surface, if you're spending a lot of your time beating that stuff down, that's not a peaceful inner environment. That's a painful inner environment. And so we just have a lot of people in that, that's how the inner landscape is. And so then around us, that's what happens. And sometimes people, I think, oversimplify things and they'll say like, if you see something in someone else that you really dislike, it's because you're seeing something in them that you know exists in you. Okay. But I mean, also sometimes you're just seeing something in someone else and it's reprehensible. And it's not. It's very much against how you feel and what you think. So, I'm never one for these sort of like trite, formulaic, looks great on a pastel meme. Those don't really speak to me. But I do believe that we have too many people in our culture who are in a state of shame, fear, doubt, anger, an adversarial relationship inside themselves. And that's one of the reasons that I practice yoga. It's also one of the reasons I teach, because for me, that was certainly this practice, philosophy, art, whatever you want to call it, has been the thing that has of all the things, meditation, yoga, those are the tools that have really helped me create a lot more peace, acceptance, kindness, compassion, forgiveness inside myself. And it's hard. It's not easy work, A lot of it is really confrontational. You have a feeling it's uncomfortable or it's icky. It makes you feel like, ooh, that doesn't seem like a good feeling for me to have. Like, I wouldn't want anybody to know I'm thinking that. Okay, well now the work is to like let yourself, figure it out. Like sit with it for a minute and try to figure out what's happening, inside yourself to create that feeling of whatever it might be, like feeling inadequate or envious or ashamed. Like what's underneath that, or what's creating that feeling in you, and when did that begin, and your own narrative about yourself. We all have them, to really examine that stuff. And that's why I was and I have been, I think, really thinking about narrative that is in the waters, because there's the narrative that you personally have about what happened in your life and why you are the way you are, and which events most shaped you, which people most hurt you, which situations most disappointed you, moments where you were able to really, shine or overcome a fear. Like you have a narrative, and sometimes that narrative is not serving you, right? Sometimes it's like it's holding you back, or a lot of the time, we want to be the hero or the victim in our own stories. And we're not looking, you need to kind of step back and look at things as truthfully as you can. And even with your best efforts, it's still going to be colored by, your perception of what has happened, and to be aware of that. And so there's so many things in the yoga practice that are really helpful, that directly speak to that stuff, that I'm always trying to teach when people are moving on their mats, and things that I certainly have learned. I used to be someone, I started practicing yoga, I was 20, and I had come out of two different households. My parents split up when I was 4, but I was really, I thought I had to get everything right all the time because I had learned if I made mistakes, the punishment was going to be really severe. And in my mother's case, love would be withdrawn. That's how it felt. It's a very conditional kind of situation. So I had learned I need to be perfect. I need to look right. I need to act right. I need to say there's no space for me to make a mistake, even a small one, which is, how do you live like that? And when you do make mistakes in that sort of mental environment, which of course you're going to, the internal repercussions are so painful. I used to berate myself, if I made a mistake, if I didn't show up in a situation the way that I felt I should have, or, there was no mercy inside myself. For other people, sure. For me, and that's, it's just a brutal way to live. And my internal dialogue was unforgiving, shaming, relentless. It was very painful. And I think a lot of people live like that. And so for me, when I started practicing, it took time. It's not, if that's your wiring that you've developed over the course of, 20 years, you're not going to be able to crash your motherboard in a few weeks. You're going to have to really, you're going to have to make it a daily intention to practice eroding those stories that are not, unraveling those stories that are not serving you and that maybe aren't true anymore. Maybe they were true at one point or they aren't now, or coping mechanisms that maybe helped you survive a traumatic childhood but are now getting in your way as a young adult or not so young adult, trying to live your life, being able to look at that stuff. Well, it's the same when you're talking about a country. If you cannot look at those things that have gone wrong, times where we have, as a society, been violent, taken more than we needed, not extended compassion, kindness, patience, tolerance. If you can't look at that, then you can't improve. You can't, make better and different decisions next time. And so this is also why, there's so many, my heart breaks when I see hate crimes and people who are we're not going to fund schools that are teaching critical race theory. What is critical race theory? It's an acknowledgement that if over the course of history a particular race has been, violated, taken advantage of, killed, millions of people killed or put in internment camps, that we understand that there's a generational trauma that gets carried forward and that it has an impact on people. It's Native Americans, okay? We came here, we said we wanted to escape religious persecution, and, in the Declaration, all the reasons why we separated from the King of England, right, and came to the United States, was a lot of it was that, and, no taxation without right, all that stuff. But we're here to escape religious persecution, yet we're going to just take the land of the Native Americans because of manifest destiny. God wants us to. What? What? It's right off the bat. It's nuts. It's hypocritical. It's violent. We're taking something that belongs to someone else and we're excusing it by saying that God wants us to do that. It's this manifest destiny. We're just going to move across the land and continue to kill anyone who gets in our way, rape anyone, pillage. That's what we're going to do. If you're not going to teach actual American history in schools, this is where you get into a real problem. You're not developing generations who are can look at that and be like, ugh, that's not good. and these are the people that are going to end up in leadership positions eventually. And so you want to be teaching, as uncomfortable as it is and as painful as it is, actual American history, slavery. We fought a civil war over this. The Confederacy, like the North and South, we fought over this. And like, if you're someone who's saying, don't remove the Confederate statues, but let's not teach about slavery in schools because we don't want the white children to feel like they're bad. Give me a break here. You got a serious problem there. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this sort of incoming. It's not just this administration. It's the fact that around half the voting public, and then there's so many people who don't participate, who don't even show up to vote for anyone, who are just checked out of this whole thing. Democracy fails when you don't have an educated, engaged electorate. It fails. This is not how it was designed to work. So we got a lot of problems here, but when half the people essentially showing up are voting for people who have very clearly said, we just want to get in there and basically do away with all the checks and balances and just start deciding what's going to happen here. That should be terrifying to everyone, and the reason that we've always had a separation of church and state is because of religious freedom, is because of the First Amendment, right? The idea, certainly one of the main ideas in this country, is that you're allowed to pray the way that you want to pray or not pray. You're allowed to believe in whatever God makes sense to you or no God. So if we're talking about public schools, and we are, that's taxpayer money. That's how our public schools exist, survive, thrive, or don't thrive. How is it fair, correct, or okay for, let's just say, your Jewish neighbors who are paying the same taxes as you? Let's say they live next door in this little scenario, and your kids go to the same school. Why should their kids have to look at the 10 Commandments and be taught the 10 Commandments when they're not Christian? They're paying the same taxes. Why should their kids have to learn about, a religion that is not theirs? That is not what we do. That's never been what we do here in the United States. And the Bible, and the reason that I went into the story of Adam and Eve is because that is a biblical story that has permeated the culture, And look, I'm someone who grew up celebrating Christmas and Easter, and I was writing about it in the essay. My mother was a lapsed Catholic, so was my dad. My mom's family was Italian Catholic. My dad's was Irish Catholic. More of a complicated story on my dad's side. But, when I came along, they were no longer practicing. And my mother had fallen in love with my dad, who was more than twice her age. He was married. He had 2 children. He left his family and married my mother, and they had me. So, already they were outside there, because in Catholicism, divorce is frowned upon. So I did not grow up with formal religion in the house. I went to a Scotch Presbyterian, a tiny little elementary school, not because it was Scotch Presbyterian, just because it was a tiny little private school. It was a little gem of a school on the Upper West Side. And even there was no, if you wanted to, you could go to Sunday school if you wanted to or not. A lot of the kids in my class, and I went to that school from first to 6th grade, were Jewish. There were a lot of people from different backgrounds, so there wasn't this emphasis at all. It was there if you wanted it, kind of a thing. But I grew up without formal religion. We celebrated Christmas, we celebrated Easter. I certainly knew, and my dad, after he left my mom when I was 4, he moved in with the woman who became my stepmom 4 years later. And she was from Yugoslavia. It's back when Yugoslavia was Yugoslavia. And she was 23, and she was Catholic, and her family disowned her because she was living in sin with a man more than twice her age. So she lost her family, and she had already lost her family once when she was a kid because of the war. Her mom and dad had to leave, and they took the 2 older siblings with them and left her and her younger sibling with the grandmother. And I mean, she had already come from a traumatic, fractured familial, situation, and then they cut her off for a second time at 23, which is just, it breaks my heart when I think about it, So just sharing that background with you so you know. So the story of Adam and Eve, I think whether you are Christian, it has permeated the culture. And there are a lot of stories that have permeated the culture, even if you're not a religious person. You're seeing things every, it's already starting. It's not even Thanksgiving, and there's already Christmas music in the stores and in the store fronts, the ones that have survived. There's it's in the culture. And so I wanted to dig into it a little bit this week, because anything that is in the waters that we're swimming in is having an effect on all of us. And when you have an election where the campaign that just won launched an attack on women, on the LGBTQ community, on, Black and brown people, you got to kind of look at what's happening here. What has happened? Who are these white nationalists? What is going on? That there are people who are worrying that in 2044, white people won't be the majority in this country anymore unless something changes. That's the trajectory that we're on. And there are people who are very upset about that, do not want to lose the white majority in this country. You know what? It would be great if the whole world just mixed it up. We'd be doing better if we could all just stop with all this stuff. Just stop, it's not serving us to police people and control people and kill people and harm people and ostracize people and vilify. It's exhausting, I don't know anyone who wants to live like this. And, but anyway, this is what we're doing. We have billionaires who are offering to pay women for IVF if they will use their sperm samples. White billionaires. I mean, this is what's going on right now. I can't even remember the guy's name. I think I deleted it from my brain, but he's got something like 120 kids or something. It's this. There's some crazy things going on here right now in this country that are, they're terrifying and devastating, and a lot of people are going to be really unsafe now. I'm assuming you're looking at this Nancy Mace thing, and this is what you want to focus on. You're worried that women and girls are not going to be safe in the ladies' room because of trans women. Let me explain something just real fast, okay, in case anyone's confused. Girls and women are unsafe because of men, okay? Not all men. I know y'all want me to say that real fast. Not all men. Far too many of you. So many of you that the current administration is seemingly having a hard time finding men to nominate who don't have a sexual assault allegation in their background. Okay? It's too many men. That's who's making women and girls unsafe. And in case you haven't been in a woman's room here, there are stalls. There's no problem. Okay? This is not a problem. The thing I'm worrying about now is trans women who have to use the men's room now. That scares me for them. Not I am not worried about my daughter in a public restroom with a trans woman. I'm not worried about that. So I don't know. I just like, this is not it. This is not the way, to be introducing legislation to make it so that the first person, senator elected, first trans woman has nowhere to go to the bathroom. That's what you want to focus on for the American people, really, is just sad and devastating. And it makes people unsafe. This is the other part. We had last week, a Nazi march. People, guys, men, of course, masked. Same guys that are, furious people were wearing masks to like protect other people from getting, an infectious virus that shut down the whole world for a few years. Now they're fully masked and they've got swastikas on their flags. And the hate crimes are going to go way through the roof like they did last time this man was in office. This is no surprise. Anyone who's going to be surprised right now, you were there, you know what happened. We had Asian American hate because he started calling it the China virus. Like, this is who if you voted for this, you got to own it. You can't, can't separate the messaging from the consequences. This is who they said they were. And if you voted for it, then this is what you voted for. And a lot of people are going to be unsafe now. And it's heartbreaking. So Adam and Eve, the reason that I dug into that is because it is in the waters, right? It is a story that people know, whether they're Christian or not, whether they're religious or not. They probably know the story of Adam and Eve. God created the universe. He did it in 7 days. On the seventh day, he rested. He made, there's the Garden of Eden, and Adam and Eve are living in the Garden of Eden, but this is Genesis 2, okay? So the Bible, just so you know, it's a collection of books. Some of them were written 1,000 years before a man named Jesus walked the earth, and some of them were written hundreds of years after by many different people. It's not one book, it's not like there's somebody taking notes there in the moment. That's not it. So, but there's this story of, the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve. Genesis 2 is Adam and Eve. Genesis 1, God created man and woman at the same time from the dirt of the earth. And man was Adam, and woman did not get a name. And later, people started calling her Lilith, okay? So Lilith and Adam were fighting, because neither one of them wanted to submit to the other. Adam said, this is not going to be an episode for kids, I'll put that at the front. Adam said he needed to be on top when they had sex, and Lilith was not up for that. She's like, why? We're equal. And he's like, you've got to do your wifely duties. And she was not having it. So she flapped her wings, because she had wings, and she left the Garden of Eden. And as she flew away, she said, God. And you weren't supposed to do that, apparently. So God sent 3 angels after her. They found her in a cave bearing children. And they said, listen, God said you have to go back to the garden. You have to go back to Adam. And Lilith said, I'm not doing that. I don't want to go back there. He wants me to submit to him. He's not treating me like an equal, and I'm not going back. And the angels said, well, if you don't go back, we're going to kill 100 of your babies a day, which, okay. I did not write the story. This is the story. So Lilith says, well, I'm not going to go back. And they kill her babies, which, we have murderous angels coming from a controlling God, a controlling, angry God. So there's that. So then, meanwhile, Genesis 2, Adam now has no Lilith, no wife, and he says to God, I'm really lonely and bored. The garden's beautiful and thank you and all that, but I don't have any company. And so God says, okay, this time instead of creating, a woman for you from the dirt of the earth like I did last time, I'm going to make Eve out of one of your ribs. So he puts Adam into a deep sleep, he makes a gash, he takes a rib, and he creates Eve, a partner for Adam. I want you to just, now, there are newer theories about what this rib actually is, because apparently like the Hebrew word for rib doesn't really make sense in this context. And so you can Google what other bone of man they think maybe this story is really referring to, because I'm just not going to go there. But essentially, Eve is just an extension of Adam, right? It's one of those "you complete me" stories where it's like, these are not two complete people. No, they're just part of, she's really just part of Adam, and her purpose and her existence is to be a companion to Adam and to submit to him the way that Lilith would not. That's her job. And because she's an extension of Adam in this story, she's happy to do that. It's great, right? Until the day that the serpent shows her the tree of knowledge and the shiny apple hanging there, and says, you should take a bite of that apple. Doesn't that look delicious? Whatever. And Adam says, actually, we're not supposed to eat from that tree. God said, don't do that. And Eve said, why? Why would, it looks delicious. And why would God create such a beautiful tree and a beautiful apple if we're not allowed to eat it? It doesn't make any sense. And the serpent encouraged her and said, it's not going to kill you. So she took a bite, and then she encourages Adam to take a bite. And then they both look down and realize they're naked. And then God comes and banishes them from the Garden of Eden, and thus original sin. So what's the story? The story is Eve is created from a rib of Adam to be his companion, to submit to him. She cannot resist temptation. She is ruled by her appetites, her desire, her rebellious nature, and thus we have the fall of man. She takes Adam down with her. And so, what is the message? The message is women can't be trusted, and if men don't control women, everyone pays the price. That's the message underneath the story. There's a lot of other things, and I know there are so many people who take comfort in the Bible, and I wanted to say all the things that I said about how I feel, about whatever gives you comfort, as long as it is, making you a better human being and making you kinder and, full of empathy and all of that. I so respect it, and I mean that. But I wanted to dig into that story because there are underlying messages here, and we are all absorbing them, whether we're, paying attention to that aspect or not. That's the story. That's what happened. Eve could not control herself. She would not listen, and we all pay the price. So those stories run through, those themes run through so much of the fairy tales that we've been taught. The knight in shining armor is coming to save the, damsel in distress who can't do it on her own, got herself into trouble somehow or another. It's running through everything, these ideas. And then at the same time, during the rise of Christianity, a lot of really important women in history were just kind of edited out of our history, and sometimes you'll see a documentary about a woman, like, how do I not know her? How did I not know about her? What, how could I have learned about American history and not learned, about the NASA, the women, it's like, why are these stories coming out way late, when we're whatever, in our 40s and 50s, we're first hearing about women photojournalists who are on the front lines, taking photos. Like, what has happened? What has happened is that we're living in a patriarchy. That is what has happened. And, I was really hoping we were going to shift into a different direction, but we just, like half the people just not only voted for it, but they put the worst of the worst men in, like there are good men out there, but not in this cabinet. So like, it's really sad. And yeah, I'm really worried and beside myself, and all of it, despairing and enraged and heartbroken and all of those things, because whatever else, like the price of groceries for sure, all these things that people are facing, they're so important, but like, these are not the people to solve these issues that we have in front of us. We need compassionate, kind people who are like, all right, you know what? We don't all have to agree about everything, but everybody needs to be able to afford health care. The people living in the margins need to be okay. If we have billionaires, like, yeah, they could pay more, because let's just think for a minute about, just for the fun of it, Amazon and all the people that work for Jeffrey Bezos who are living below the poverty line. What is that about? Like, maybe, don't you think he should pay some more taxes? Because he relies on those workers. He couldn't do what he's doing. He couldn't have amassed the billions of dollars he had if not for people living in the fringes, So, yeah, of course I'm concerned. It's like I'm not taking a dig just at one thing. I'm really trying to shine a light on all the messaging that we are all immersed in that is infecting the waters and creating a toxic situation where we just put a lot of really scary people in power here, and I mean, it's going to get worse, not better, for everyone. And I know there are people who were like, I don't want my tax dollars going toward, bombs and weapons. I don't either. I've never wanted that, ever. That's not what I want. I don't even eat animals. Like, I don't want to participate in a cycle of death and destruction. But these were not the people. And I think that's the part that's like, they made it really clear. They made it really clear who they were. I know some people just wanted change. They were just desperate for change. I get it. I know that we have the internet and there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation. And let me tell you, I have someone in my family who did not vote for Trump because this family member had a very bad personal experience with this man. People in New York can tell you stories, okay? I know this person that I'm talking about right now who's in my family, and my stepmom, the 23-year-old I was talking about earlier, the Yugoslavian, she's an architect who ended up doing a job. Her firm that she worked for ended up doing a job for the Trump organization, and they got badly screwed and put out of business. So people from New York have personal stories that they did share, and they have been sharing. There's not no confusion about who this person was, but or is, but yeah, this just wasn't it. This is not the team to address like the serious situation that we have created for ourselves and all the different ways that we need to be trying to lift people up. And I do think it's really sad if your religion is teaching you that the way people love each other is a sin, or scaring you about feelings someone else has that you don't understand. Like, that's just about controlling, right? It's about getting people in a society to live the way you want them to live. It's like, that's not it. I mean, if you go back to everything I have ever learned about Jesus, right? Like, if you believe a guy named Jesus walked the earth, and you might not, right? You might not believe that, but if you do, he liked to be around spirited, independent women. Mary Magdalene, for example. You know, he tended to the most vulnerable members of society. He'd wash the feet of lepers. Like, this was not a person who would be like, mass deportations, yeah. Like, you know, and I'm not saying that we don't have a border crisis. We have for decades. We've had an immigration crisis in this country. It's not new. So it's like, yeah, there are actual real problems to solve. And what you don't do, in my opinion, is you don't put a bunch of misogynist, racist, bigoted, white nationalists in power to address those things. That's not it. So I don't know what's going to happen here, you know, but yeah, I'm worried. And no, I don't think anything these people are saying is Christian in any way, or, you know, this is not it. Like, so that's where I am. And that's why I've been so interested in sort of like narrative and origin stories and what is swimming in the waters here that we're growing up in. And for little, you know, for girls and women is kind of the last thing I'll say. It's not just, you know, these messages they're going out to everyone, right? All the things I was talking about here, like Adam and Eve and women being wiped from history and not learning about major people who had an unbelievable effect on history, and, you know, inventions, and there's just as many women in history who have done remarkable, unbelievable things, but we don't hear about them nearly as much. The same way, like, medically, men and men's issues have been studied, you know, to an incredible degree more than women's issues. When I went to the doctor, I'll tell you this last thing. I had a male, I'm not with him anymore, but I had a doctor a few years ago, and after my mom passed away at the end of 2021, it really, like, it did me in. You know, I was in a really, just the state of grief that I was in. I start crying right now. It unmoored me. It untethered me. I just felt so incredibly, untethered. And in just a deep state of loss and grief, to the degree that I went to the doctor and I was like, look, I don't know, because I haven't been through this before. I don't know. I am going to start crying. I don't know if what I'm feeling is quote unquote normal grief or perimenopause or both. And I wondered if you could, like, check my hormones. And his response to me was, would your family say that you're unpleasant to be around? And I was so confused by the question that I said, I'm sorry, what? And he said, if your family would they say that you are unpleasant to be around? And I just, like, burst out crying, because the thought of that was so horrifying, but also, like, where am I in this conversation? I came to you and said, I'm not okay. And your first thought is whether I'm being unpleasant around my family. And he was like, well, you know, I can put you on an antidepressant, and then, you know, that way, like, if you, and I was like, no, I'm going to go. I'm going to leave. I wanted to have my hormones checked to see if that was a component of what I was feeling. And instead, what he wanted to do was make me pleasant to be around. And obviously that person's not my doctor anymore. That's not an uncommon thing, okay? It's not. There's a story right now, trying to remember what publication it's in, but there was an 11-year-old girl who went to the police in Florida. I think it was Polk County. And she said her foster dad, her adopted father, had been raping her from the time she was 9. And they instantly took the dad's side and the mom's side and accused her of lying and brought charges against her for a false allegation. Told her, your dad's business is going to go under if you don't take this back. You're not going to be able to. Your mom's going to, not be able to afford to get you those shoes you wanted for school. This is an 11-year-old, right? And she eventually took it back. She couldn't prove it, so she took it back, and he did it again. But this time, she managed to record what was happening. And then she went back to the police. There are stories all the time of children who, there's a raid and it turns out their dad has like child pornography on the computer and the mom is totally had no idea. And the guy goes to prison. And then when he gets out, he has custodial rights and there's nothing the mom can do. She's sending her, 10-year-old daughter over to have unsupervised visits with the dad. Like the legal system, in every way, shape, and form here, things are set up for men and not women and girls and children, young boys too. It's not good. So origin stories and narratives internally and around us, really good stuff to look at. And I hope that this was helpful, interesting, maybe food for thought, maybe some things to just reflect upon and consider. And I'm really easy to find if you want to talk. But I can tell you that my intention is never to offend, and I would never disrespect someone's spiritual practice. Just looking at the stories, that's all. And I'm sending you a lot of love. Until next time.